Sarah, a devoted wife and mother, had once enjoyed what seemed to be a blissful marriage with Richard. He had been a caring, loving husband who always made time for his family. But lately, Sarah had begun to notice a strange shift in Richard's behavior toward her and their children. He often used work as an excuse to leave early and come home late, becoming increasingly distant and less attentive each day. Gone were the mornings when Richard would sit down with Sarah and their 2 children for breakfast. Instead, he would rush out of the house, claiming he had an early meeting or something important to attend to. What started as an occasional occurrence quickly became a routine. Sarah felt a deep sense of loneliness whenever she sat with the children at the table, Richard's absence looming over them. She couldn't help but wonder if the change was something about her, or if Richard had simply grown indifferent to family life. She also began noticing a difference in how Richard handled his phone. He now carried it with him everywhere, even within the house. Whenever he received a call, he would leave the room to take it. Sarah could sense the unease in Richard's eyes whenever she asked about these calls, leaving her with a growing suspicion that something was amiss. Sarah decided to dig deeper into the changes in Richard's behavior. She began reviewing his spending history and discovered that Richard had been spending significant amounts of money at upscale restaurants she had never visited. She also noticed that Richard frequently purchased gifts, but none of them were ever for her. The stories Richard used to share about work started to feel vague, peppered with inconsistencies and conflicting details. To make sense of it all, Sarah started keeping a journal, documenting the discrepancies in his words and actions, hoping to uncover some clarity. Richard, meanwhile, became more irritable and quick-tempered. He lashed out whenever someone touched his phone or computer. He also spent increasingly long hours at the office, often claiming he had urgent tasks to handle. He would come home late, and whenever Sarah questioned him, he would brush her off, saying, "You don't understand the pressure of my work." Sarah's growing unease made her wonder if there was more to Richard's excuses than he was letting on. Sarah felt she couldn't continue living in doubt without any concrete evidence. She made the difficult decision to hire a private investigator to look into Richard's activities. This wasn't an easy choice for her, as she had once trusted Richard unconditionally. Hiring an investigator felt like admitting that trust no longer existed. After a few weeks, the investigator brought Sarah photos and videos that left no room for doubt. Richard was seeing another woman. The meetings took place during work hours at upscale restaurants and private venues. Sarah saw images of Richard laughing and joking with the woman, his eyes filled with affection. Sarah's heart felt like it was being torn apart. She couldn't believe that the man she had loved and trusted could betray her so cruelly. Sarah felt a sharp, piercing pain in her chest as she looked at the images. She decided to learn more about the woman in the photos. After some investigation, she discovered that her name was Emily, a young, attractive woman. Emily had a small child, about 3 years old, which made Sarah begin to suspect a connection between Richard and the child. One afternoon, Sarah decided to follow Richard to gather more information. She trailed him to a park where he met Emily and the child. From a distance, Sarah saw Richard holding the child lovingly and playing with him. Her heart broke at the sight, as she realized the painful truth. Richard had betrayed her, and the child was undoubtedly his. Sarah returned home feeling as though her entire world was collapsing. She didn't know what to do, as the pain of the discovery was overwhelming. However, she knew she couldn't continue living in this web of lies. She resolved to confront Richard and demand an explanation for his actions. She needed answers, even if the truth would shatter her completely. But before taking that step, Sarah knew she had to prepare herself emotionally and ensure her children were shielded from the fallout. She understood that the life ahead would no longer be the same, but she vowed to do whatever it took to keep her children safe and happy. Sarah realized she needed courage and strength to face this heartbreaking reality head-on. Sarah could no longer wait. One evening, when Richard returned home late as usual, she decided to confront him. She sat in the living room, waiting with the photos and evidence the investigator had given her. When Richard walked in, she noticed the tired look on his face, but she refused to let that sway her resolve. "Richard, we need to talk," Sarah said, her voice cold but firm. Richard looked at her, a flicker of worry in his eyes. He sat down across from her, attempting to appear calm. Sarah handed him the photos. "How do you explain this?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Richard looked at the images, his face turning pale. He stammered a few words in an attempt to justify himself, but he failed to provide any convincing explanation. "Who is Emily? And who is that child?" Sarah pressed on, tears streaming down her face. Richard lowered his head, silent for a long moment. Finally, he sighed, as though all his strength had left him. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I've done something terrible. That child is mine." Richard's confession felt like a dagger piercing Sarah's heart. She couldn't believe that the man she had loved and trusted could betray her so deeply. She stood up, her legs shaky, and walked out of the room without saying another word. She needed time to think, to process the devastating truth she had just learned. Sarah spent the entire night in the bedroom, tears streaming endlessly down her face. She felt as though her entire world was crumbling. The images of Richard and Emily, the moments of him playing affectionately with the child, replayed in her mind over and over. She questioned herself. What had she done wrong? Why had Richard chosen to betray her and their family? The next morning, Sarah woke up with swollen eyes. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding the situation. She had to make a decision about her future and that of her children. She walked downstairs to find Richard sitting there, looking exhausted and remorseful. "We can't go on like this, Richard," Sarah said, her voice hoarse from crying so much. "You've destroyed my trust, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you." Richard looked at her, his eyes brimming with tears. "I know, Sarah. I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I just hope you can give me a chance to make it right, to make amends for you and the kids." Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, Richard. I need time, and maybe we need to be apart for a while so I can think things through more clearly." Sarah decided to move out of the house with her 2 children. She needed space to think and regain her balance. She relocated to her mother's home, where she could find comfort and support from her family. Sarah's mother, Margaret, a strong and understanding woman, held her tightly as Sarah recounted everything, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You did the right thing, Sarah," Margaret said. "You don't have to endure this betrayal and pain. You deserve a better life, and I'll always be here to help you through whatever comes your way." Sarah felt a sense of relief having her mother by her side. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it. Her priority was to ensure her children grew up in a safe and happy environment, free from the tension and pain Richard had caused. As Sarah worked to rebuild her life, Richard was left to face the consequences of his actions. He felt an overwhelming loneliness in the house that was once filled with laughter and joy. He realized he had lost the most precious things in his life. Emily began demanding more responsibility from Richard for their child. She insisted he provide both time and financial support. Their arguments became increasingly frequent, leaving Richard feeling drained and trapped. Not only had he lost his family, but he also found himself under immense pressure from the relationship that had caused so much pain. Desperate to make amends, Richard tried to contact Sarah, hoping to talk to her and ask for forgiveness. He wrote her long letters, expressing deep regret and his desire to make things right. But Sarah didn't respond. She needed time to heal, and she wasn't sure if she could ever go back to the way things were with Richard. Richard began to see that his betrayal hadn't just hurt Sarah. It had destroyed parts of himself as well. Rumors of his affair had spread at work, causing him to lose the respect of his colleagues. He was demoted, and people around him treated him with disdain. Richard understood that he had to take full responsibility for everything that had happened. He resolved not to give up and vowed to prove to Sarah that he was truly remorseful and committed to change. But whether that would be enough to salvage what had been lost, He didn't know. All he knew was that he couldn't bear to lose Sarah and their children without giving his absolute best effort. Sarah knew she needed to clarify everything before making any final decisions. Despite her shattered heart, her rational mind demanded that she uncover the full truth. Quietly, she managed to obtain a strand of Richard's hair and a sample from Emily's child when the opportunity arose. She sent them for DNA testing to confirm whether the child was truly Richard's. Every day waiting for the test results was agony for Sarah. She knew she needed to brace herself, but the pain in her heart was impossible to suppress. Sleepless nights were spent staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with dark thoughts. She wondered if she had the strength to continue living this life and how her children might endure the fallout from their broken marriage. Finally, the DNA test results arrived. Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands, anxiety and fear consuming her. As she had suspected, the results confirmed that the child was indeed Richard's. There was no longer any doubt. Richard had betrayed her, and he had a child with another woman. Sarah felt her heart clench in pain once more, but this time, a sense of determination rose within her. She knew she could no longer live in this web of lies. It was time to face the truth and take control of her life. She would no longer allow herself to be a victim of Richard's betrayal. Sarah decided not to delay any longer. She needed to confront Richard one final time to clarify everything and make a decision about her future. She called Richard and asked him to come home early for a talk. Richard agreed, unaware that this conversation would be a turning point for both of them. When Richard arrived home, Sarah was already seated at the dining table with the DNA test results in front of her. Seeing the envelope and the resolute expression on Sarah's face, Richard realized there was no room for excuses or lies anymore. "Richard, I had a DNA test done. The child is yours," Sarah said, her voice cold yet charged with emotion. Richard fell silent, his face turning pale. He knew there was nothing left to justify his actions. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Richard said quietly. "I was wrong, and I know that. I can't say anything to defend myself. I just hope you can forgive me and give me a chance to make things right." Tears streaming down her face, Sarah looked at Richard. "Forgive you? Richard, I gave you all my love, trust, and my life, and you betrayed me, betrayed this family. Do you have any idea how much that has hurt me? I don't know if I can forgive you, but I know I can't keep living like this with you anymore." Richard remained silent, aware that his apologies would never suffice. Sarah stood up and walked out of the room, tears continuing to flow down her cheeks. She knew she had to make a decision, not just for herself, but for the sake of her children. Sarah decided to officially end her marriage with Richard. She could no longer endure the pain and deceit. She had given too much time and love to someone who didn't deserve it. She hired a lawyer and began the divorce process. It wasn't an easy decision, but Sarah knew it was the best choice for her and her children. Richard initially tried to convince Sarah to change her mind. He begged her to give him a chance to make amends, promising to do everything to regain her trust. But Sarah was exhausted by empty promises. She had seen enough and knew she needed to protect herself and her children. During this time, Richard was forced to move out of the house and find a new place to stay. He felt empty and alone in the small apartment he rented temporarily. Every night, he reflected on his mistakes and on Sarah, the woman he had lost due to his selfishness. He began to realize that love wasn't just about words but actions, and his actions had destroyed everything he once held dear. After Richard moved out, Sarah began rebuilding her life. She focused on her job and caring for her children, determined to create a safe and stable environment for them. Although she still felt pain and emptiness, she knew she was on the right path. With each passing day, Sarah grew stronger and less tied to the painful past. Sarah's mother, Margaret, remained a pillar of emotional support. She helped with the children and was always there when Sarah needed her. Slowly, Sarah realized she wasn't alone, that she still had her family and friends willing to support her. She began participating in community activities and reconnecting with old friends. rediscovering joy and meaning in her new life. Richard, meanwhile, struggled to move forward. He still hoped for a chance to make amends. But Sarah was firm in her decision to move on. She had made her choice and was ready to leave the past behind. Richard had to accept the reality that he had lost his family due to unforgivable mistakes. Emily, whom Richard had once thought might bring him happiness, began to grow tired of their relationship. She didn't want to bear the responsibilities of raising their child alone and started demanding more accountability from Richard. Their conflicts escalated, and Richard began to realize that the life he had chosen wasn't as fulfilling as he had imagined. Sarah, after her period of grief, rediscovered the joy in life. She no longer dwelled on Richard or the pain he had caused. She knew she deserved a better life, one free from betrayal and deceit. She taught her children about love and honesty, hoping they would never endure the pain she had experienced. Sarah's life gradually became more peaceful. She learned to forgive not for Richard's sake, but for her own. Forgiving herself allowed her to move forward without being held back by the past. She knew her journey was far from over and that challenges still lay ahead. But she was ready to face them. Her priority was to protect her happiness and the well-being of her children. Sarah was determined to create a new life, free from the shadows of pain and betrayal. She spent more time with herself and her children, taking them to the park, participating in sports activities, and doing things she had never had the chance to do before. She also started writing, journaling her thoughts and emotions, using it as a therapeutic way to heal her heart. Her career began to flourish as well. Sarah was promoted and earned the respect of her colleagues. Focusing on her work gave her a renewed sense of purpose and value, helping her move away from her dependency on her relationship with Richard. She understood that by being confident and strong, she could be a better mother for her children. Sarah's mother, Margaret, remained a constant presence in her life. She helped care for her 2 grandchildren and provided unwavering emotional support. Sarah realized that no matter how tough life got, she had her family and loved ones by her side. This gave her the strength and motivation to keep moving forward. While Sarah was rediscovering joy and meaning in her life, Richard found himself sinking into loneliness and despair. He realized he had lost everything that truly mattered. His relationship with Emily deteriorated, with conflicts between them growing more frequent. Emily demanded more from Richard, financially and in terms of responsibility for their child. Richard felt trapped in a life he had never wanted. He tried reaching out to Sarah, hoping to talk to her and beg for her forgiveness. However, Sarah had changed her phone number and made it clear she wanted no contact with him. Richard realized that the chance to make amends had passed, leaving him with nothing but regret and solitude. Richard's struggles began to affect his work. His lack of focus led to him being fired from his job. Without a stable income, his life became heavier and more stressful than ever. He finally understood that his poor decisions had cost him his family, his career, and any semblance of a hopeful future. Sarah gradually grew stronger after everything she had been through. She was no longer the fragile woman who depended on the love of a man. She had learned to stand on her own and find joy in the simple things in life. Her children also adapted to their new life and seemed happier without the tension and arguments that had once filled their home. Determined to grow further, Sarah enrolled in a psychology course to better understand herself and how to cope with emotional pain. She also wanted to help other women who were going through struggles similar to hers. Studying and supporting others gave her a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment. One day, at a psychology seminar, Sarah met Mark, kind and insightful man. Mark was one of the speakers, and his inspiring stories deeply resonated with Sarah. They began talking and soon became friends. Mark offered Sarah something she had never experienced with Richard, a sense of safety and respect. He listened to her without judgment, showing understanding and compassion. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt truly seen and valued. Mark and Sarah gradually developed a special relationship, not love at first sight, but one built on deep empathy and understanding. Mark knew Sarah had endured great pain, so he didn't rush things. He was patient, always there when she needed him. And over time, Sarah felt her heart beginning to open again. Sarah's children also grew fond of Mark. He often visited their home, played with them, took them on outings, and taught them new things. Watching the radiant smiles on her children's faces, Sarah realized she had finally found true happiness again. She knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She had the strength to face whatever came her way, moving forward with renewed hope. Richard, in his solitude, finally came to terms with the fact that he had lost the chance to have a happy family. He understood that he couldn't undo the past or repair the damage he had caused. Yet, he hoped that one day he might find peace within himself. As time passed, Sarah and Mark's bond grew stronger. They didn't rush into marriage but instead cherished every moment together, building a relationship rooted in genuine respect and love. Sarah knew that no matter how painful the past had been, she deserved to hope and find happiness again. And so, Sarah closed a chapter of sorrow in her life to begin a new one, filled with love, hope, and the peace she had always deserved. After meeting Mark, Sarah's life gradually transformed in a positive direction. Mark brought joy and warmth to her and her children in ways they had never experienced before. Sarah felt her heart slowly healing, and she realized she could open herself to love again. The fear of falling in love had disappeared, replaced by a sense of safety and appreciation that Mark gave her. Sarah and Mark didn't rush their relationship but nurtured it gently and deeply. They spent weekends together, taking Sarah's children on picnics or participating in community activities. Mark always made Sarah feel comfortable and never pressured her. He understood that she needed time to adapt and move past the scars of her past. One autumn afternoon, Mark invited Sarah and her children to his home for a cooking evening. His house, though simply decorated, exuded warmth and coziness, making Sarah feel at peace. Together, they cooked the children's favorite dishes, shared stories, and laughed. As Sarah looked around at the scene before her, laughter filling the room, the comforting aroma of food, and the genuine joy on her children's faces, she realized this was what a real family felt like. Not perfect, but filled with love and genuine care. It was the kind of family she had always hoped for. While Sarah was rediscovering happiness and building a new life, Richard found himself grappling with the consequences of his past mistakes. He lost his job, and his relationship with Emily quickly fell apart. Emily, unwilling to shoulder the responsibility of raising their child alone, demanded financial support from Richard. However, without a job, Richard felt more trapped and hopeless than ever. Desperate, Richard tried reaching out to Sarah, asking for a second chance, but she firmly declined. Sarah had moved on and resolved to keep her distance from Richard to protect herself and her children. Richard realized that he couldn't undo the past, and what he had lost was gone forever. Slowly, he began to learn how to live with his regret and solitude. One evening, Richard walked past the park where he used to play with his children. Seeing families enjoying happy moments together, his heart grew heavy. He reminisced about the beautiful times he once had and understood that he had destroyed it all with his own hands. In that moment, Richard recognized that he needed to change, not to win Sarah back, but to become a better person and a father his children could be proud of. It was a glimmer of realization that perhaps, despite the damage done, there was still a chance to rebuild himself for the future. As time passed, the bond between Mark and Sarah grew deeper. Mark was not just a boyfriend but also a true companion, someone Sarah could trust and share everything with. He stood by her through tough times and brought laughter and joy to her and her children's lives. Sarah noticed that her children adored Mark as well. He had a special way of making them laugh, helping them with their homework, and playing with them whenever he could. Mark even participated in school activities for Sarah's kids, making them feel loved and cared for. This gave Sarah peace of mind, reassuring her that she had found someone truly deserving to share her future with. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Mark and Sarah sat together on the porch. A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of jasmine. Mark looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with love and sincerity. Sarah, I know you've been through so much pain, but I want you to know that I'll always be here for you and your kids. I love you, and I want to build a new family with you. A family filled with love and respect, Mark said. Sarah, deeply moved, felt tears streaming down her face. She knew she had finally found a man who genuinely loved and valued her. She gently took Mark's hand and nodded. I love you too, Mark. I'm ready to move forward, and I know we'll have a beautiful future together, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Sarah and Mark decided to move in together. They didn't rush into marriage, choosing instead to take their time building a loving and connected family. Sarah's children were thrilled to know that Mark would become a part of their lives. They affectionately called him Uncle Mark, showing him love and respect. Sarah's heart overflowed with happiness as she saw the strong bond forming between Mark and her children. Together, they decorated their new home, turning it into a true haven where every member of the family felt safe and loved. Mark helped Sarah's children redesign their bedrooms, letting them choose paint colors and decorations, creating cherished memories in the process. For Sarah, this home symbolized a fresh start, a place free from the fears of the past. Meanwhile, Richard, despite having lost everything, began taking steps to change his life. He attended counseling sessions to confront his mistakes and heal from his emotional wounds. He also found a new job, not as prestigious as his previous position, but it was a fresh start. Richard understood that his regret couldn't undo the past, but he could at least strive to be a better father for his children. As for Sarah, she knew life would never be perfect, but she felt she had found true happiness. She had Mark, who loved and respected her deeply, and her children, who brought her joy and purpose every day. She had overcome the pain and loss of her past and was now ready to embrace the future with love and hope. One afternoon, as the family sat together in the garden under the soft glow of the setting sun, Sarah looked around and smiled. She realized she had traveled a long, difficult journey, but she had finally found what she had always longed for: a family filled with love and peace. Holding Mark's hand tightly, she watched her children play in front of her, her heart brimming with gratitude and hope for a bright future. And so, Sarah closed the chapter of her old life to begin a new one, filled with love, peace, and the happiness that she and her children truly deserved.